In the waning days of World War II, as Allied forces closed in on Nazi Germany from all sides, whispers spread through military intelligence channels about a weapon so extraordinary, so fundamentally opposed to the laws of physics as we understood them, that its very existence seemed to belong more to the realm of science fiction than battlefield reality. Yet this whisper, this ghost story told in bunkers and interrogation rooms, would echo through decades of scientific inquiry, conspiracy theory, and classified speculation. It was called Die Glocke, the bell. And what we're about to explore is not just the story of a machine, but a mystery that challenges everything we think we know about Nazi Germany's technological ambitions, the boundaries of experimental physics, and the terrible power that emerges when ideology, desperation, and unbridled scientific imagination collide in the crucible of total war. Picture this. Somewhere in the mountains of Eastern Europe, in underground facilities hidden from Allied bombing raids, Nazi scientists were allegedly constructing something that resembled nothing so much as a massive metallic bell, roughly 10 to 15 feet in diameter, suspended within a cylindrical framework, filled with a mysterious substance that some accounts describe as a radioactive mercury-like compound, others as something far more exotic and unknown. And the purpose of this machine, according to the fragmentary testimonies that would emerge after the war, was nothing less than the manipulation of the very fabric of space-time itself, the bending of gravity, the distortion of temporal flow, capabilities that even today, more than 80 years later, exist at the absolute frontier of theoretical physics, the stuff of unproven hypotheses and mathematical abstractions, rather than functional engineering. The legend of Die Glocke didn't originate in popular culture or UFO enthusiast forums, though it certainly thrives there now. Instead, it emerged from the testimony of individuals who claimed direct knowledge of the project. Men like Igor Witkowski, a Polish journalist and author who, in 2000, published a controversial account based on alleged interviews with a former SS officer, and men like Joseph Farrell and others who have spent years reconstructing what they believed was the purpose and function of this device, a reconstruction that, while fascinating and occasionally compelling in its internal logic, departs dramatically from the established historical record and from the consensus of the scientific community regarding what is and is not possible within the known laws of physics. But here's where the story becomes genuinely interesting, and where we must separate the historical evidence from speculation. We know that Nazi Germany was absolutely obsessed with developing advanced weapons technologies, that they invested enormous resources into research, into everything from jet aircraft to cruise missiles to nuclear weapons. And we know that some of this research was conducted by brilliant scientists who were working, whether willingly or under coercion, within the Nazi state. What we don't know, and what remains tantalizingly mysterious, is whether Die Glocke ever actually existed, whether it functioned as described, or whether it was instead a misidentification of some other experimental technology, a rumor inflated through retelling, or perhaps an elaborate deception spread by Nazi intelligence agencies to confuse the Allies about their true capabilities. The physicists who have examined these claims seriously approach them with profound skepticism, not because they are closed-minded, but because the claims contradict everything we have learned through a century of rigorous experimental physics, because the testimonies are fragmentary and inconsistent, and because the documentary evidence, the blueprints, the photographs, the technical specifications that would inevitably exist if such a project had truly been undertaken, has never materialized despite decades of searching by researchers with access to declassified documents and to survivors who might have possessed first-hand knowledge. Dr. Harold Puthoff, a physicist who has worked on unconventional propulsion concepts, has noted that while we do have theoretical frameworks, like Alcubierre's metric, that mathematically describe how space-time might be warped, These theories require exotic matter with negative energy density in quantities that may be physically impossible to obtain, and that the engineering challenges alone would be so staggering as to make them effectively impossible with 20th century technology, or perhaps with any technology available in the foreseeable future. What physicists are genuinely concerned about, however, is not so much Die Glocke itself, but what the persistent belief in Die Glocke represents: the erosion of the boundary between speculation and established science. The way that plausible-sounding scientific terminology can be woven into narratives that sound scientific without actually being science. The troubling tendency for fringe theories to gain traction among the general public, while the actual patient, rigorous work of physics proceeds with far less fanfare and attention. The actual history of Nazi experimental physics is strange enough without embellishment. The German scientific establishment in the 1930s and 1940s was genuinely world-class in fields like theoretical physics, but it was also crippled by the Nazi regime's ideological opposition to Jewish physics, to the theory of relativity, to quantum mechanics as understood through the Copenhagen interpretation. Brilliant Jewish physicists fled the country, and those who remained or who were appointed to positions of power had to navigate a treacherous political landscape where ideology and science collided constantly. Within this context, secret weapons research did flourish, and the Nazi regime did fund all manner of speculative projects, some of them promising, others almost delusional, ranging from the technologically advanced Me-262 jet fighter to the wildly impractical and largely non-functional wonder weapons that Hitler obsessed over in his final years. Projects like the Maus super heavy tank or the recent Kampfwagen, gigantic mechanized war machines that existed more in the realm of fantasy than in operational capability. And it was in this atmosphere of possibility and desperation that stories about Die Glocke would have thrived, would have seemed somehow plausible to those hearing them in the chaos of the war's end. The origin point for modern Die Glocke mythology can be traced fairly directly to an article published in the Italian technical journal Nexus magazine in 1999, which discussed a purported secret weapons project, followed shortly by Igor Witkowski's book, which provided more detailed accounts, and then by a cascade of books, documentaries, and internet content that has progressively elaborated and transformed the original claims into an ever more elaborate mythology. What is remarkable is how this mythology has evolved, becoming increasingly specific in some details while remaining frustratingly vague in others, how it has absorbed elements of UFO lore, of anti-gravity research, of cutting-edge theoretical physics, creating a narrative that sounds scientifically sophisticated even as it contradicts established physics at fundamental levels. The supposed function of Die Glocke, according to the most elaborate versions of the legend, was nothing less than a gravity well generator, a device capable of creating a bubble of distorted space-time that could serve as an inertial dampener, allowing a spacecraft or vehicle within the field to accelerate and decelerate without the occupants experiencing the crushing G-forces that would normally accompany such motion, a device that could potentially enable faster-than-light travel or time manipulation, capabilities that would represent a complete revolution in physics and engineering, and that would necessarily overturn everything we think we understand about causality, the speed of light, and the fundamental structure of the universe itself. To evaluate such claims, we need to understand what we actually know about gravity and space-time, the real physics, rather than the speculative physics, Einstein's general theory of relativity, formulated in 1915, describes gravity not as a force in the Newtonian sense, but as the curvature of space-time caused by the presence of matter and energy, a profound insight that was confirmed through decades of experimental verification, that has been refined and extended, and that forms the foundation for our understanding of everything from planetary orbits to black holes to the expansion of the universe itself. Within general relativity, it is mathematically possible to construct solutions to Einstein's field equations that describe exotic objects and situations, wormholes, closed time-like curves, and, yes, warped space-time geometries that could theoretically enable faster-than-light travel without violating causality, such as the Alcubierre metric proposed by physicist Miguel Alcubierre in 1994. However, and this is crucial, these solutions require assumptions about the universe that may be physically impossible. They require the existence of exotic matter with negative energy density, negative mass, in quantities that would dwarf the total mass energy of the observable universe. And they are plagued by causality paradoxes and other problems that suggest they may be physically unrealizable, even if mathematically consistent. In other words, while general relativity technically permits these possibilities, general relativity also permits us to think very seriously about why nature itself might forbid them. Through mechanisms like the chronology protection conjecture proposed by physicist Stephen Hawking, the idea that the laws of physics include some mechanism that prevents closed, time-like curves and the paradoxes they would create. The legend claims that Die Glocke was based on entirely new physics, on theories beyond Einstein, on a complete reconceptualization of the relationship between matter and space. And while such revolutionary physics is certainly not impossible in principle, science progresses through paradigm shifts after all. It must be said that there is no credible evidence that Nazi physicists achieved such a breakthrough. No evidence that the basic principles of gravity and space-time that we have verified through a century of experiments were somehow wrong in ways that would permit the creation of gravity well generators in the 1940s. What makes the Die Glocke legend so persistent, what allows it to capture the imagination so effectively, is precisely that. It operates at the boundary of the known and unknown, that it uses real scientific concepts and real historical facts as scaffolding for a narrative that extends far beyond what evidence supports, and that it appeals to powerful psychological drives, the desire to believe that hidden knowledge has been suppressed, that secret military and scientific establishments possess technology far beyond what civilians are permitted to know, that somewhere in the classified files and the memories of aged informants lies a truth that would revolutionize everything. This is the same mechanism that allows countless pseudoscientific claims to flourish in our information-saturated age, the sophisticated use of scientific language, the appeal to authority, the creation of a narrative that feels internally consistent and emotionally compelling, combined with just enough genuine historical facts and genuine scientific concepts to create plausibility. The actual classified research that we know did occur during World War II in Germany. The projects that have been documented and declassified include things like the Heers für Sandstalt Peenemünde, the Army Research Center that developed the V-2 rocket under Werner von Braun, a genuinely revolutionary weapons system that represented a huge technological leap forward and that would directly influence the American and Soviet space programs in the post-war era. The X-7 guided missile, various jet aircraft projects, radar developments, and numerous other military technologies. These real projects were ambitious, futuristic, and represented genuinely cutting-edge engineering for their time, and they did rely on theoretical physics. But they did not involve violations of the known laws of physics or the manipulation of gravity and space-time. The testimony that supposedly supports the Die Glocke legend comes from several sources, the most prominent being George Klein, a former German aerospace engineer who allegedly claimed in interviews in the 1950s that he had worked on a secret Nazi project to create an aircraft with electromagnetic propulsion, and Igor Witkowski's interviews with what he claimed was a former SS officer named Jakob Sporenberg. Though the accuracy and even the authenticity of some of these accounts have been questioned by historians, and the details have proven difficult to verify. Moreover, if such an extraordinary project had actually existed, we would reasonably expect to find blueprints and technical drawings of which none have ever surfaced, photographic evidence from the various Nazi archives, and the military records captured by the Allies, none of which has been definitively identified as Die Glocke. Testimony from multiple independent witnesses with consistent details, whereas the testimony we have is fragmentary, inconsistent, and largely hearsay. And most importantly, some sort of physical evidence, remains of the device itself, or of the facilities where it was constructed. And despite decades of searching by researchers and treasure hunters, nothing has been found. What we do find, when we examine the historical record carefully, is that rumors of Nazi secret weapons proliferated wildly in the final years of the war, and in the immediate post-war period, as both the Allies and the Soviet Union searched frantically for Nazi scientists and technologies that might give them an edge in the emerging Cold War, as German engineers and scientists, many of them opportunistic and willing to exaggerate the importance and capabilities of their work in order to secure positions in the post-war world, told stories to anyone who would listen. As intelligence agencies tried to make sense of fragmentary information, and often created elaborate theories that were far more speculative than the evidence supported. It was in this fevered atmosphere of espionage, ambition, and confusion that stories like Die Glocke took root and began to grow, elaborated with each retelling, acquiring new details and new suppositions, until they became the elaborate mythology we know today. The persistence of the Die Glocke legend, despite the lack of evidence, reveals something important about how we as a species process information and construct narratives, particularly when those narratives involve technology, secrecy, and the possibility of hidden knowledge. We are drawn to stories that seem to explain anomalies or to fill gaps in our understanding, and we are particularly susceptible to stories that confirm our existing biases or that play into our anxieties about authority and deception. The scientific consensus that Die Glocke either never existed, or if it did exist, was something far more mundane than the legends describe, is not based on a closed-minded refusal to consider exotic possibilities, but rather on a careful evaluation of evidence, and on an understanding of physics that has been verified through countless experiments and observations. What genuinely worries some physicists and historians of science is not the possibility that Die Glocke existed, but rather the broader pattern of how misinformation and pseudoscience can take hold, how scientific-sounding language can be deployed to make unfalsifiable claims seem credible, how the boundary between science and speculation can be deliberately blurred in ways that undermine scientific literacy and critical thinking in the broader public. The Die Glocke legend has been particularly consequential in this regard because it has become entangled with UFO mythology and with various claims about extraterrestrial technology, creating a narrative ecosystem in which it becomes nearly impossible to separate genuine historical questions from speculative fantasies, in which the lack of evidence for a claim becomes reframed as proof of successful cover-up rather than as reason for skepticism. In recent years, some researchers have attempted to rehabilitate the Die Glocke legend through more sophisticated scientific arguments, pointing to genuine gaps in our understanding of gravity and quantum mechanics, suggesting that the German scientists might have been investigating phenomena that current physics cannot explain. And while it is true that there are deep mysteries in physics, the nature of dark matter and dark energy, the incompatibility of general relativity and quantum mechanics, the ultimate nature of space-time itself, it does not follow from these mysteries that the Die Glocke legend becomes more plausible, only that we should remain humble about the limits of our understanding. True scientific progress occurs through careful experimentation, through peer review and replication, through the accumulation of evidence and the rigorous testing of hypotheses, not through the elaboration of historical legends or the reinterpretation of fragmentary testimony in light of modern scientific concepts. The actual cutting edge of physics research today, the work being done at institutions like CERN, at observatories around the world, at universities and research centers in dozens of countries, this work is pushing at the boundaries of the known in ways that are genuinely exciting and revolutionary, discovering new particles, confirming predictions of quantum field theory, detecting gravitational waves, mapping the cosmic microwave background, advancing our understanding of the universe in ways that would have seemed like pure fantasy to physicists of the 1940s. Yet this genuine scientific progress receives far less public attention and cultural resonance than the Die Glocke legend or similar pseudoscientific mythologies, in part because genuine science is typically less cinematically dramatic than conspiracy and mystery, in part because the real details of modern physics are genuinely difficult to understand and communicate to a lay audience, and in part because human beings seem to have a psychological need for hidden knowledge and covered-up truths that conflicts with the patient, incremental, public nature of actual scientific discovery. The Die Glocke story endures because it taps into deep currents in our culture. Our fascination with Nazi Germany and its technological ambitions, which themselves became legendary and grew in the retelling, our hunger for secret knowledge, and our suspicion of official narratives, our simultaneous attraction to and fear of technological power, and our desire to believe that the world contains mysteries more profound and wonderful than our everyday experience suggests. There is nothing wrong with mystery and wonder, with speculation and imagination. But there is a crucial difference between imaginative speculation labeled as such and pseudoscientific claims masquerading as suppressed historical truths, between the kind of storytelling that expands our sense of possibility and the kind that undermines our ability to distinguish evidence from invention. When we look at the Die Glocke legend with clear eyes, when we examine it against the historical record and against what we actually know about physics, what we find is a cautionary tale, not about Nazi superscience or suppressed anti-gravity technology, but about how mythology takes root even in the modern world, how rumors can crystallize into apparent facts, how the line between history and fiction can become dangerously blurred, the genuine history of Nazi physics, of the scientists who worked for and against the regime, of the technologies that were actually developed and the paths not taken, of the terrible moral compromises that science can be pressed into making. This genuine history is complex and sobering and important, and it deserves to be understood on its own terms rather than through the lens of fantastic legend. What physicists are truly terrified of is not that Die Glocke might have existed, but that we as a society may be losing the ability to distinguish careful scientific thinking from elaborate storytelling. That technological progress driven by genuine understanding may be displaced by a culture of myth-making and pseudoscience. That in our hunger for hidden truth, we might lose sight of the painstaking, humble work of actual discovery. The lesson of Die Glocke, then, is not that physics is hiding revolutionary secrets from us, but that we must learn to be more critical consumers of extraordinary claims, that we must insist on evidence and consistency and replicability, that we must understand that science advances through the accumulation of small truths verified through careful experiment, not through sudden revelation of suppressed megatechnologies, and that perhaps the most mysterious and wonderful thing is not an undiscovered Nazi secret weapon, but the actual universe as it reveals itself through rigorous investigation, a universe far stranger and more beautiful and more comprehensible than any fiction we might invent.